If you have ever stood by the tracks and felt the ground shake, then you have witnessed the raw power of the 7FDL. This engine did more than move trains. It fueled General Electric's rise from a struggling outsider to an industry giant. But that victory came only after Alco's downfall. When Alco crumbled in the late 1960s, it left behind chaos and uncertainty in the diesel locomotive market. Railroads were desperate for something stronger, more dependable, and built to last. That is when General Electric seized the opportunity. The company unveiled the 7FDL, an engine that was powerful and ruthless in performance. The 7FDL16 dominated it, becoming the cornerstone of GE's locomotive empire and the symbol of Alco's ultimate defeat. From the revolutionary U-25B to the unstoppable Dash 9s that dominated America's rail lines by the 1990s, the 7FDL was everywhere. It was GE's ticket to supremacy. With it, General Electric transformed from an underestimated junior partner into the undisputed ruler of North American locomotive power. This is the story of the prime mover that propelled GE to the top and sealed Alco's fate forever. For decades, Alco's steam locomotives drove America's biggest railroads, and their reputation for strength was unmatched. But power built on steam cannot survive a world running on diesel. When the industry shifted, Alco stumbled, and that stumble turned into a free fall. Their downfall began with the 244 engines, launched with great promise after World War II. On paper, it was a bold statement. A powerful rival meant to challenge EMD's rock-solid 567. In reality, it was a disaster. The 244 became infamous for breakdowns, leaving railroads frustrated, fleets grounded, and Alco's once proud name tarnished beyond repair. Crankshaft failures, overheating, and chronic cylinder problems haunted the locomotives that were supposed to secure Alco's future. The company had promised progress, but instead it delivered frustration, and in the railroad world, unreliability is a death sentence. Repairs drained budgets, breakdowns paralyzed operations, and by the early 1950s, Alco's customers had run out of patience. Desperate to reclaim lost trust, Alco introduced the 251 engine, which was tougher, smoother, and far more dependable than the disastrous 244, but it was too late. In the railroad industry, trust is currency. While Alco scrambled to fix its image, its rivals surged ahead. And in the background, one partner was watching General Electric closely. For years, GE had supplied the traction motors and electrical systems that powered Alco's diesels. That partnership gave GE an inside look at Alco's growing list of mistakes. GE learned exactly what railroads wanted. Engines that started every time, ran all day, and never begged for mercy. Consistency, reliability, power. The very things Alco had lost. By the mid-1960s, Alco was on life support. EMD ruled the industry, and railroads were desperate for a fresh alternative. That moment of weakness was all General Electric needed to strike. In 1959, GE made its audacious move into the locomotive market. With the U-25B, the first road switcher built entirely under the GE banner, and at its core was a beast of an engine, the 7FDL. This power plant would redefine the balance of power in American railroading. Even its name carried purpose. The 7 traced its design lineage, while FDL stood for 4-cycle, direct injection, lean burn. A declaration that GE was done playing by anyone else's rules. At a time when competitors like EMD were clinging to their 2-stroke engines, GE's 4-stroke approach was a rebellion. The 7FDL was not flashy. It was not built to impress. It was built to endure. Tough, relentless, and ready to run longer and harder than anything Alco or EMD could offer. At the core of GE's new powerhouse lineup was the 7FDL16, 16 cylinders, 4 strokes, and an initial output of 2,500 horsepower. GE built the 7FDL16 with evolution in mind. And over the years, they pushed it well past 4,000 horsepower, all without compromising the engine's original framework. That kind of foresight was a game changer. Railroads loved the flexibility. A locomotive bought in the 1960s could be upgraded decades later instead of being hauled off to the scrapyard. The 7FDL's fabricated steel crankcase, lighter yet stronger than traditional cast designs, gave it both durability and efficiency. And its modular construction meant critical parts. From cylinder heads to turbochargers to injectors could be swapped in record time. In an industry where every idle hour bleeds money, downtime was the real enemy. GE understood that, and the 7FDL was engineered for one purpose: to keep trains moving, not rusting in maintenance yards. Then came GE's masterstroke, the turbocharging system. Designed to optimize airflow and fuel efficiency at every throttle setting, it was the culmination of years of GE experimentation on smaller industrial engines. The 7FDL was where all that research converged to a machine that dominated, proving that GE was the new standard. The U-25B proved that GE's promises were cold, hard results. Here was a locomotive that stayed on the rails longer, pulled with more muscle, and demanded far less in maintenance costs. And when railroads realized that GE was not only building engines, but actually listening to redesigning access points, standardizing parts, and backing every sale with strong field support, adoption was inevitable. Once the industry took notice, GE did not hesitate. The 7FDL became the beating heart of everything that followed, from the U-30s of the 1960s to the -7s and -8s that dominated the main lines for decades. What started in 1959 was a new chapter. It was the beginning of GE's takeover of North American railroading. The 7FDL's legend was built on three principles: reliability, adaptability, and sheer toughness. Qualities the industry had been starving for since Alco's collapse. The four-stroke cycle made all the difference. Yes, it meant more moving parts than a two-stroke, but it also meant cleaner combustion, smoother performance across speeds, and far longer service life between rebuilds. Railroads that lost faith in Alco's moody 244 and even grown weary of EMD's quirks suddenly saw GE's 7FDL for what it was: the engine that could take the punishment mile after mile and just keep grinding forward. The direct fuel injection system was another of GE's secret weapons. While competitors were still using outdated methods to mix air and fuel, GE's injectors delivered precision, placing the fuel exactly where it needed to be for maximum efficiency. The result was sharper throttle response and stronger fuel economy. Crews noticed immediately. The cleaner exhaust was more than just cosmetic. It was proof that GE had engineered a smarter, more disciplined machine. Once again, GE had chosen innovation over imitation. Scalability was another masterstroke. The 7FDL came in both 12 and 16-cylinder versions, giving railroads the freedom to choose their level of power without abandoning the platform they already trusted. Smaller lines could rely on the lighter 12-cylinder units, while major carriers unleashed the full 16-cylinder monsters on mainline freights. Either way, the maintenance crews were working on the same core design: fewer parts to stock, less training to juggle, and far more consistency across fleets. And then there was the overlooked brilliance of its cooling and lubrication systems, engineered not for convenience, but for endurance. These systems kept the 7FDL running harder, longer, and cooler than anything Alco or EMD could field. They cemented GE's reputation as the builder that understood what railroads truly needed: an engine that never quit. GE's engineers knew exactly what they were building: a workhorse that refused to break. They equipped the 7FDL with oversized radiators and a powerful oil circulation system, allowing it to take brutal punishment in any environment. Whether it was hauling coal through the freezing Rockies or dragging intermodals across the scorching desert, this engine kept its cool. Overheating and lubrication failures, the nightmares of rival designs, were practically unheard of in the FDL lineup. And then there was its raw toughness. The 7FDL's crankshaft was overbuilt, its bearings heavy-duty, and its block engineered to withstand crushing cylinder pressures that would cripple lesser engines. It thrived on hard labor, endless miles, brutal weather, and the kind of pounding freight duty that would reduce weaker machines to scrap. The 7FDL was not revolutionary because it looked different. It was revolutionary because it performed differently. A no-nonsense powerhouse that proved reliability was not just a design goal for GE, it was an obsession. The 7FDL gave the rail industry exactly what it had been begging for: dependability on a massive scale. That single trait became GE's greatest weapon, the foundation on which it wrestled control of the market, first from a collapsing Alco and later from the seemingly untouchable EMD. When GE rolled out the U-25B in 1959, few understood just how seismic that moment would be. Nicknamed the U-boat, it was GE's first road switcher built entirely in-house. And more importantly, the first true showcase of the 7FDL's capabilities under real-world conditions. Railroads noticed immediately. The U-25B delivered the horsepower it promised, stayed out of the repair shops longer, and when it did need attention, maintenance was refreshingly straightforward. For managers juggling tight budgets and grueling freight schedules, that kind of reliability was gold. And GE was just getting started. As the 1960s progressed, the U-25B gave rise to an expanding fleet, the U-30, U-33, and U-36, each packing a more refined version of the 7FDL under its hood. Every new model pushed GE further into territory once dominated by EMD, proving with each delivery that the era of General Electric as a secondary player was over. By the time the decade closed, railroads had made their verdict clear: GE's machines were the future. Many railroads that had once dismissed GE as an untested newcomer began to change their tune. The U-Series locomotives proved themselves across every kind of service: fast freights, heavy coal drags, mixed runs. And they did it with a consistency that railroads could finally trust. The U-boats delivered results, day after day, mile after mile. Meanwhile, Alco was collapsing. The company that had once been the pride of American locomotive engineering was now a shell of its former self. By 1969, Alco finally bowed out of the locomotive business altogether. A stunning fall from grace that left the battlefield wide open. GE immediately stepped into the void. The U-boats had done exactly what they needed to do. They proved GE could design, build, and sustain mainline diesels at full industrial scale. They proved the 7FDL had the muscle and durability to anchor an entire generation of locomotives. Most importantly, they proved that the balance of power in North American railroading was shifting, and it was shifting fast. By the 1970s, the unthinkable had become reality. It was now a legitimate threat to EMD's throne. And rather than rest on its early success, GE pushed forward with precision. The next evolution arrived in the form of the -7 series, locomotives that refined everything the U-boats had started. The -7s featured advanced electronics, smarter cooling systems, and a more efficient version of the 7FDL engine. They were practical, reliable upgrades, giving railroads exactly what they wanted: steady progress, not risky experiments. In an industry that valued consistency above all else, GE had finally mastered the formula for dominance. As the decades rolled on, GE refused to slow down. The -8 series of the 1980s marked a bold new era, one defined by smarter technology and even greater muscle. Equipped with microprocessor controls and improved fuel efficiency, these locomotives could haul longer trains, tackle steeper grades, and endure tougher schedules with fewer breakdowns. The performance difference was impossible to ignore, and railroads noticed. Orders began flooding in. Then came the -9s of the 1990s, the moment when the legendary 7FDL16 reached its ultimate form. Pushing up to 4,400 horsepower, the -9 was a monster in every sense of the word. A locomotive built to dominate. Railroads across North America lined up in droves. Burlington Northern Santa Fe, Norfolk Southern, CSX, Union Pacific, all betting their future fleets on GE's proven powerhouse. Before long, the sight of a Dash 9 thundering across the continent became a defining image of modern railroading. It was a symbol of how completely GE had rewritten the rules. The Dash 9's success sealed the deal. By the mid-1990s, the unthinkable had happened. EMD's decades-long reign was over. GE, once dismissed as a risky outsider, had become the gold standard. Railroads now trusted what GE had spent years perfecting: rugged engineering, relentless reliability, and the kind of power that never blinked under pressure. By the close of the 20th century, GE had achieved what once seemed impossible. The 7FDL had carried the company straight to the top of the locomotive industry, powered by a reputation for rugged engineering, practical design, and unmatched customer support. But as the new millennium dawned, a different kind of challenge loomed. The world was changing, and so were the rules. Stricter environmental regulations were reshaping the rail industry. The iron giants that once thundered across the continent without question now faced intense scrutiny over emissions and efficiency. GE's answer was nothing short of revolutionary: the Evolution series, driven by the GE VO12 engine. Introduced in the early 2000s, it was a complete reinvention. Designed from the ground up to meet Tier 2 emission standards, the GE VO12 combined cutting-edge turbocharging, electronic fuel injection, and advanced digital controls. Despite dropping from 16 cylinders to 12, it delivered the same, and often greater, pulling power as its predecessors, reaching up to 4,400 horsepower, while burning less fuel and producing far fewer emissions. It was a bold statement from GE: cleaner, smarter, and just as unstoppable. This marked a true turning point in locomotive history. The GE VO12 was about proving the very philosophy that made the 7FDL legendary: practical, reliable, and scalable engineering. Still, the 7FDL families did not disappear overnight. Legendary models, like the Dash 9s and other FDL-powered locomotives, continued hauling freight well into the 21st century, and remarkably, many are still running strong today. But over time, the GE VO series took center stage, becoming the defining face of GE's modern dominance. Railroads ordered them by the thousands, making the Evolution series the most widely adopted freight locomotive line of the century. For decades, the FDL powered everything from heavy coal drags to high-priority intermodals, hauling the weight of American industry day after day. Even now, many still run, some on Class 1 railroads, others finding new life on short lines and industrial duties.